I don't really know how else to say this, so I might as well just get to the point. I used to work at the local butcher shop for a man named George. If I didn't know any better, I'd say he was sent from hell itself for one mission: to be a butcher. The longer I worked there, the further I fell into his trap. The rules for the job were unlike any I'd ever had before. They were strange, almost paranoid, though I never questioned them. Not until the night I broke one. That's when everything changed. I took the job to make some extra money, but now I'm in too deep. Things have happened that cannot be reversed. He cannot and will not stop unless someone makes him. With how things have gone in this whole fucked-up saga, I fear that I will have to be the one to do it. I never thought I would ever be put in a situation like this, and yet here I am. Hopefully, I can put an end to this, but in case I go missing, I want people to know my story. You need to know the truth about Red Hill Meats and the monster behind the counter. It all started about a few months ago. I had finished the week sore, dirty, and dead tired, just like the last 3 before it. I was working a temp job at a distribution center on the second shift. Temp work doesn't promise much more than muscle aches and a few crumpled bills at the end of the week. I was stuck in a loop of torment, a literal hell that I couldn't find my way out of, but I needed the money. At the time, there was no way I could find anything better with my disreputable past as an ex-con. I'd gotten into some drug trouble when I was younger, causing me to miss out on almost all of the good jobs. I can't say I blame them, though. A felony charge doesn't look too good on a resume, and nobody wants to take that risk if they can avoid it. I had been staying in my cousin's garage during that time. There was no AC and no insulated walls, just concrete floors and brick. I ran an extension cord through the window to a box fan, which ran almost 24/7. It was the only relief I got from the oppressive summer heat. The measly paycheck I made per week was mostly spent on food and paying my cousin for crashing at his place. The only nice part about it was that he had a small built-in bathroom attached to the garage, so I didn't have to go upstairs to use it. Honestly, I was barely surviving. I needed a change. It was a Friday night and the end of another grueling work week when I stopped at the station on 39th and Holloway for my weekly beer run. The sun had already drifted behind the horizon. The air was thick with humidity, making it hard to breathe. I was walking up to the door, grabbing the handle, when I saw it. A yellow, stained piece of paper, curling at the edges, was pinned to a cluttered corkboard outside the station's door. It was handwritten in black marker, smeared by the rain. It was barely legible, but it jumped out at me. Something about it caught my eye, but I couldn't place it. I shuffled over to the corkboard, grabbing the paper in my hand. It read, "Help wanted. Apprentice butcher. No experience needed. Cash paid weekly. Ask for George." I stared at it for a while, letting the words settle into my mind. Apprentice butcher. It sounded like something that I could grow with, something real. I wouldn't be just a number on a shift in some shitty warehouse. No, I would be somebody. I would be someone that people depended on to deliver fresh meat every day. The prospect of hard and rewarding work appealed to me. I had always wanted to belong. I thought that maybe this could be my ticket. I could actually learn something with this and maybe get my own place one day. Getting paid cash weekly wasn't bad either. To me, that meant it would most likely be under the table and tax-free, with no temp agency taking its cut at the end of the week. I called the number the next afternoon. A man with a deep, raspy voice picked up on the first ring. "Red Hill Meats, how may I help you?" he asked. Anxiety shot through me. I had only done this once or twice before when I was younger. "Hello, my name is Tom. I'm calling about the apprentice butcher position. I was told to ask for George," I said, clearly showing my nervousness. "You got 2 hands?" he asked sternly. "Yeah," I responded, not thinking how stupid the question was. "You're afraid of blood?" "No, sir," I answered. "Come in tonight at 8. Wear boots." Click. I held the phone to my ear for a minute or so after he hung up, in shock. I had become so nervous that I wouldn't get the job that I had almost talked myself out of it. I had tried not to get my hopes up before calling, but somehow I had gotten the job. The first thought that crossed my mind was how this could lead to me being able to leave my cousin's garage. I thought that maybe this could be my ticket. I could actually learn something with this and maybe get my own place one day. Getting paid cash weekly wasn't bad either. To me, that meant it would most likely be under the table and tax-free, with no temp agency taking its cut at the end of the week. As I laid the phone down, I began to think about what the work might look like. There would be cold rooms, sharp knives, and maybe a blood-stained apron. Hard work for sure, but not pointless. This job had a purpose. I had a purpose. I didn't have a plan, but I had a name and a time. I took a nap for a couple of hours before getting dressed and heading down to the butcher shop. The place looked like it had been there since the Eisenhower administration. On the corner of 16th and Crenshaw sat a small, square building tucked behind a closed-down VFW. The red brick building stood out amidst all of the modern storefronts. It looked like it had been plucked out of the past and sat directly on that corner. There was no signage except a metal cleaver bolted to a leaning post that had Red Hill Meats written across it in cursive font. I examined the exterior as I neared the front door. There were no hours listed and no lights out front for customers. The place honestly creeped me out. For a moment, I had second thoughts. Maybe I should just leave, I thought. Just go back to my temp job. I probably wouldn't be good at this stuff anyway. I stood, staring at the windows, when a passing car honked at a cat that had run in front of it, shaking me out of my trance. I shook off the feelings of creepiness and gathered the courage to open the front door and walk in. The bell above the door jangled as I stepped inside. The interior was cold and smelled like sawdust and copper. A tinge of iron and rot hung in the air behind the coppery smell, like an old surgical theater. The place had a strange vibe. It wasn't like any butcher shop I had ever been in before. It had the kind of aroma that crawls up into your sinuses and builds a nest there, never letting you forget it. A few empty chairs sat against the wall next to the door. They were old and caked in dust. They looked like they hadn't been used in years. Next to the chairs was an old newspaper stand that held 2 curled and yellowed papers. I walked over and grabbed the paper, interested in what the date might be. The text was mostly faded, but I could make out a faintly printed date at the top of the first paper, February 19th, 1979. "Wow, this place is pretty damn old," I said under my breath as I investigated the paper. I knew that butcher shops weren't very popular anymore, but I figured this one would at least have a newspaper with the correct date up front. I put down the paper and walked further into the shop. I leaned over the front counter, looking across at the hallway in the back.
"Hello," I called out. "George, are you here? It's me, Tom." I didn't receive an answer, but I could hear a squelching noise coming from deep inside the shop. Curiosity overtook me as I pulled open the small door that separated the front of the shop from the rest of it. I peeked behind a curtain where I had heard the sounds coming from. A man was standing by the bone saw, hands and arms covered in blood. He was chopping a large piece of meat that looked like a ham. He was wiry, with silver hair clipped close to the scalp, and eyes that didn't blink, even as the cleaver slammed into the meat and bone. He stared intently into the meat as he chopped, never flinching from his work. He wore a white butcher's coat that had been washed so many times the bloodstains looked like a watercolor painting. Long smears of blood swirled into one another, blending shades of red and pink into one homogeneous blob. "George?" I asked shyly. He stopped abruptly, freezing his swing mid-air at the intrusion. The cleaver hung above his head, ready to be brought down once more. He turned his head quickly toward me, slowly lowering the blade to the chopping block simultaneously. "You the kid who called?" he asked. "Yeah," I answered, swallowing my nervousness. He looked back down at the block, laying the cleaver down on the table. He grabbed a rag and began wiping the blood and cracked bone from his arms. "You eat meat?" he asked, looking down at his arms as he cleaned them. "Sure," I answered confidently, trying to impress him. "Good. Vegans don't last here," he said, chuckling heartily. He leaned over the table and jostled some items around. He turned and tossed me a pair of gloves and a thick black apron. "We start now," he said, with a wide, intense smile.
I thought there would be some kind of orientation or tour, but no. He turned back toward the cutting table, continuing his work. I was confused. Did he just expect me to start cutting without instruction? I thought this could be my first test. Maybe he wanted to see if I could take it working here. I tied the apron around my waist and slid the gloves on my hands before slowly approaching the cutting table next to George. He shot me a glance, smiling wryly and muttering something under his breath that I couldn't quite hear. He grabbed another piece of meat, sliding it across the table. With one swift motion, he lifted his cleaver and slammed it down against the wood, easily splitting the meat and severing the bone in half. Seeing him cut so effortlessly made me nauseous. The sound of the meat and tendons tearing, along with the sickening crunch of bone snapping, made my skin crawl. I stood there too petrified to move, observing his movement. He turned to look at me, his smile quickly twisting into a frown. "You're not quitting on me, are you?" he asked. My eyes instinctively shot down at the bloody cleaver. His hands gripped it so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I pulled my gaze up to his eyes, which were filled with intense focus. "No, sir," I stuttered. "I was just observing you before I started." I played along, not wanting to get fired on my first day.
He let out an exasperated breath and laid the cleaver down. He wiped his hands on his apron and held them up in front of him. "If you want to keep this job, kid, you gotta follow the rules," he said. His voice boomed with immense weight, hammering into my brain that his rules weren't just policy, they were the law. He raised a finger. "1. Never be late," he said, never breaking eye contact with me. "We work while the town sleeps. The shop opens at 8 p.m. sharp and closes at 4 a.m. If you miss a shift, you don't come back." A second finger rose from his fist. 2. Don't talk to the customers, not unless they talk to you first. And if they ask questions, any at all, keep your answers short or come get me. The skin on his face tightened, and the intensity in his eyes peaked as he raised a third finger. 3. Stay away from cooler number 7. I don't care if it's unlocked, leaking, or making noise. You don't go near it. Ever. After he told me the third rule, the intensity in his eyes seemed to dissolve as quickly as it had appeared. He smiled and lowered his hand. "Simple, right?" I nodded, trying to hide the chill crawling up my spine. No matter how uncomfortable it felt, I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. I was working at the butcher shop now. I would have to perform and follow his rules, whether I liked it or not.
That first day was one of the most awkward situations I've ever been in, with the next couple of days being much of the same. He didn't explain much. He moved like a machine, every cut precise and calculated. I started with trimming the fat off ribeye steaks, following his silent instruction as best I could. Once I had mastered steak trimming, he let me butcher my first full carcass, a large pig. It had already been gutted and was hanging from a hook at the back of cooler number 1. He had 7 total walk-in coolers, each labeled with the type of meat they contained. Coolers 1 and 2 contained pork, while coolers 3 through 5 had beef. I didn't know what the last two contained. They were tucked in the back of the building behind plastic strip curtains with no labels on them. I didn't ask about them. I figured if he wanted me to know what was in there, he would tell me. I hit the release button on the hoist, and the carcass came slamming down onto the meat cart. I wheeled the carcass into the cutting room, and George helped me raise it onto the table. He handed me a boning knife, smiling wryly. "Start at the hock and work your way up," he said, staring at me. "Don't hit the bone. It dulls the blade."
He looked down at the carcass and pressed his finger into an invisible groove in the skin, tracing an outline as if he were using his finger as a blade. "Slide between the joints. The muscle will show you where to go." I didn't want to screw it up, so I watched and copied. It took hours to break it down, wrap the cuts, and label them. Chops, loin, deli, hams, the primal cuts. I eventually zoned out, falling into the steady flow of butchery. There was something meditative about the work. It was so repetitive, yet precise and clean in a twisted way. Then came the second carcass, bigger, not a pig this time. I recognized it immediately. George rolled the meat cart into the cutting room with a large deer lying across it. He slid the carcass onto the floor, motioning for me to help him. I hurriedly grabbed the hind legs and lifted the animal onto the cutting table. In the back of my mind, I thought that this was what the last two coolers were for, wild game meat. It was weird to see venison in a butcher shop, but not unheard of.
"Got a special request," George said as he began sharpening his knife. I didn't ask questions. I just followed George's lead, hesitantly at first, but eventually falling back into the groove I had found with the pig carcass. Cut, wrap, label, stack. We cut meat next to each other deep into the night, finally finishing the last cuts just after 2 a.m. I labeled the last couple of pieces and started washing everything down. George slid off his coat, hanging it on an old rusted rack next to the entrance of the cutting room. "Get the rest of the trays cleaned and spray the tables down," he said, wiping his arms down with a rag. "After that, you can head on home." He paused for a moment before looking up at me. "You did good today, kid," he said, smiling slightly. "I got to admit, I didn't think you'd make it, but you have thoroughly impressed me." He tossed the rag into a dirty old trash bin next to the coat rack and pushed the plastic strip curtains aside, walking out of the cutting room and toward the front counter. I quickly turned my attention to the meat trays, trying to get them clean as fast as possible so I could head home for the night. The last tray clattered as I shoved it into the drying rack. I grabbed the hose and sprayed down the cutting tables, blasting away the blood along with bits of fat and bone clinging to the metal. The red-tinged water swirled toward the rusted floor drain, slowly spiraling into a clumpy stream of detritus. Though there was none left, the smell of raw meat lingered in the air, thick and heavy. No matter how much soap and water I used, the smell remained. Just as I was about to turn off the hose, I heard a dull thud echo from somewhere inside one of the walk-in coolers. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me stop what I was doing. I paused, shutting off the water to listen closely. Silence flooded back into the room, with the only audible sound being the buzzing fluorescent lights above me. My curiosity gripped me. I figured it was probably George stacking some boxes or checking stock, but something in the back of my mind was telling me to look. "George?" I called out, wiping my hands on my apron. There was no answer. I stepped into the hallway, the chill immediately biting at my damp skin. My eyes immediately drifted to the curtains that concealed coolers 6 and 7. I quickly but carefully made my way down the hall. Pushing through the curtain, I revealed the mythical metal doors of the last two coolers. They were thick, reinforced with something beyond normal insulation. I hadn't really paid attention before, but now, as I stood in front of them, I could see deep scratches around the handle of Cooler 7. They were faint, barely showing through the shining stainless steel, but they were there. I reached out, half ready to turn the handle, when a voice cut through the cold air behind me. "Don't go in there." I turned fast, nearly slipping on the wet floor. George stood on the other side of the curtain, holding it aside with one hand. His face was half lit by the overhead bulb, cloaking his eyes in mystery. His voice was calm, but something in the way he stood there made my hair stand on end. He waited rigidly under the dying orange light, with his other hand behind his back, as if he were hiding something. "Sorry," I stammered, stepping back. "I thought I heard something." He stared at me for an uncomfortable amount of time, then nodded. "Sometimes the coolers creak, pipes knock. This place is old. You'll get used to it." He gestured toward the front of the shop. "Go home, get some rest. We've got a lot of orders tomorrow." Stunned by the interaction, I didn't move right away, and neither did he. An uncomfortable silence once again filled the space between us. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke, cutting the tension. "You did good today," he repeated, "but don't let your curiosity cost you." He smiled, relaxing his rigid stance a bit. I nodded slowly and turned to head in his direction. His body took up the entire hallway. I would have to pass him to leave the shop. As I tried to duck through the curtain around him, he grabbed my arm, startling me. "What's wrong?" I asked, tripping over my words. He stared into my eyes as if he were searching for something, before quickly lifting a smile onto his face. Nothing's wrong, son," he said, still firmly holding my arm in his grasp. "I just don't want to lose a good employee."
His cold gaze pierced into my soul, delivering an unspoken warning of defying his judgment. He released my arm and stepped aside, allowing me to slide around him and out toward the front door. As I pushed the door open, I could feel his gaze burning a hole into the back of my head. I didn't look back. The situation had already gotten uncomfortable enough. I had just stepped 1 foot out of the door when I heard his voice rise from behind me. "Hey, kid, wait a second." Half of my brain was telling me to leave and not look back, yet the other half was telling me not to move. My fight or flight instinct was in deadlock. I slowly turned, expecting yet another death stare. George was walking toward me, looking down at something in his hands. He fumbled with it as he continually closed the gap between us. He stopped and pushed his hand out toward me. "Here you go," he said in an upbeat tone. "Figured I'd give you your first week's pay a little early." This was the complete opposite of what my mind had prepared me for. I looked down at his hand, which was full of crumpled-up bills. I paused for a moment, seemingly forgetting that this was my job now. "Oh, thanks," I stuttered as I reached out and grabbed the wad of bills from the man's rough, calloused hand. He smiled as he turned and walked back behind the counter, disappearing through the plastic strip curtains. My mind raced as I walked out of the shop and towards my car. I sat down in the driver's seat, replaying the interaction in my head. It was so strange, so tense. I tried to push it to the back of my mind as I looked down at my hand, which was still clutching the money he had given me. I unfurled my fist and dumped the cash out into my passenger seat. With the aid of my cabin light, I counted out $350. "What the fuck?" I said aloud, reeling from the amount. "This must be a mistake. There is no way he meant to pay me this much."
I started to get out of the car and go back inside the shop, but my body wouldn't let me. I had been overworked and underpaid for so long that this somehow felt good. I had actually made some pretty good money for doing something that I thought at this point was fairly routine. I crumpled the bills back up and slid them into my pocket. I turned the key in the ignition and headed back to my cousin's place to get some much-needed rest. The next few shifts came and left, a lot faster than I had expected.
By the time I clocked in each night, the place felt oddly familiar. It was as if nothing had changed, that I had always been here. George didn't act any different, still cold and distant like normal, but as time passed, I started to get the sense that he had a side to him I hadn't seen yet. I started to feel more uncomfortable with each passing day. It wasn't the work that unsettled me. It was the silence, the way he moved, the way the place felt, the way I got paid. It all felt so strange. It was just now dawning on me how weird this all was. I had been blinded by greed, allowing money to stifle my concerns. My third week at the shop is when things took a turn. George had acted a little strange at the start of that Wednesday night, but I had just chalked it up to the work week taking its toll. It was just after 1 a.m. when he handed me the usual pile of orders to prep for the next day. Beef, pork, venison, just like always. I finished the cuts I had left on my table and began my nightly cleanup routine before moving to the next task. George hung up his coat and headed toward the coolers. I grabbed the last of the trash bags filled with used gloves and bloody rags and started tossing them into the industrial trash bin out back. It was deathly quiet out there. Not even the crickets dared disturb the silence. I carried the last bag out into the alley and was about to tie it up when I heard footsteps approach from behind me. I stood up quickly, swirling around on my feet. George was standing at the back door, holding a cigarette, the warm glow of it illuminating his face as he took a drag. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice raspy, like it had been a long time since he'd spoken at all. I nodded, unsure where this was going. "Sure." He took a long, slow drag and tossed the cigarette on the ground, grinding it under his boot heel. The alley was dim, but I could make out his silhouette within the faint light of the doorway. "You tired?" he asked, taking a step closer. Yeah, I answered. "I'm pretty beat." George smiled and looked up at the sky, as if letting his mind wander. "That's good," he responded. "It means you worked hard. Means you care." He looked back down at the ground, kicking at the gravel for a few seconds before speaking again. "I don't get a lot of people stopping by here anymore," he started, voice low. "The shop's been here a long time, longer than most folks remember." He paused, staring blankly at the ground for a moment. "You know, this place has a long and rich history. People used to drive 100 miles to get meat from here. Used to have a line out the door." I didn't say anything. What could I say? He seemed to be talking out loud to himself, and I wasn't going to interrupt that. George wiped his hands on his apron, then rubbed his neck like he was trying to stretch out tension. "Times change," he continued, his tone slipping into something more reflective. "People want their meat from the grocery store now. They want convenience. No one comes to the butcher anymore." He turned his eyes toward me. I could barely make out his face in the dim light. He was studying me as if I were a part of a puzzle he was slowly solving. "It's hard to find good help nowadays." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. I didn't know if he was trying to get me to feel sorry for him or just felt nostalgic for some reason. "You remind me of someone," George said abruptly. "Someone I used to know way back." That caught me off guard. He didn't look old enough to have seen a lot of history, but he spoke like he had lived 100 lifetimes. "Who?" I asked before I could stop myself. He smiled, but not in a warm way. It was the kind of smile you see in old photos of people who have seen too much. Someone who understood this work, not afraid of the mess or what it means to get dirty." His eyes narrowed like he was waiting for my reaction. "Most people don't understand, you know, but you're different."
His voice dropped, and the weight of his words settled over me, snaking across my shoulders. I wanted to laugh it off, but something in his stare made it impossible to dismiss. "What do you mean?" I asked. For a moment, there was a strange tension between us. It wasn't the summer heat, and it wasn't the late hour. It was the look in his eyes, the kind you get from someone who knows something you don't. George stepped closer, his boots scraping against the gravel. "Some jobs come with a price, kid. Some things you can't unsee." He chuckled, but it didn't sound like he was joking. The world doesn't care about the blood spilled as long as the cuts are right. I couldn't speak. I felt like I had wandered into a conversation that I wasn't supposed to hear. Everything inside of me was panicking, thinking that he might be having a strange flashback or something. Suddenly, his voice shot through the dark, breaking me from my spiral of worry. "Now get inside. We've still got work to do," he said, his voice snapping back to business. "It's late, and we can't leave this mess behind." I stood there for a moment as he turned and headed back into the shop. My mind was buzzing with everything he had just said. I shook my head, forcing myself back into work mode, and shoved the last bag into the dumpster before quickly heading inside. For the rest of my shift, I tried to shake off the feeling that I had been handed a warning I wasn't fully prepared to hear. The next few days were more of the same. I had started to get used to the rhythm of the work, though it was still hard to ignore the deepening sense of something wrong in the air. The man didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. He was always watching, remaining sharp and vigilant. His movements never faltered, lending credence to his machine-like pattern. It was mechanical, like he had done this all his life and had no interest in anything else. Now and then, I'd see or hear something that didn't quite make sense. The marks on the metal doors of the coolers always loomed in the back of my mind, and yet I always managed to push them away. The way George would become so still and so quiet if I ever mentioned the coolers was what stuck out to me the most. I couldn't just push that away. I started getting paranoid, wondering if I was just imagining things. I thought that maybe I was still getting used to the place. It wasn't until I started to find strange things hidden throughout the shop that I couldn't bury my concern anymore. I found an old butcher's knife behind the counter that wasn't like the others. This one had a strange patina, almost like rust, but darker. The edge was smooth but uneven, like it had been sharpened countless times. It had ornate designs that covered the crimson red handle, like they had been carved by hand. Strange words were etched into the butt of the handle. I couldn't recognize them, but it seemed to be in Latin. The inscription read, "Memento Mori." I had no idea why, but every time I looked at it, a chill ran through me. I told myself I was just overthinking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right with it. I slid it back into its drawer and left it alone, trying to forget I had ever seen it.
One night, just after we finished with another deer carcass, George handed me the usual wad of bills, this time without even saying a word. It was another huge payout, but there was something about the way he handed it to me that unsettled me. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. His gaze was fixed on the floor as if he were somewhere else entirely. I slipped the money into my pocket, as always, and began sweeping the customer area. George was behind the counter, his back facing me. The overhead lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the room, stretching them across the white tiles. Something strange hung in the air, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Suddenly, I heard the faintest thud come from behind the coolers. My heart skipped a beat. I knew it wasn't just the old building settling, not this time. I grabbed a rag and wiped my hands, trying to play it cool as if I hadn't heard anything. I wasn't a seasoned vet, but I knew enough about this place to realize that something was off here. My mind raced, creating all manner of things that could have made the mysterious sound. Animals, creatures, anything and everything you can think of. Though my mind dared me to, I didn't want to confront it yet. I glanced at George. His back was still turned, but I could see his posture had changed. He was tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. I took the opportunity to speak up.
"George?" I called out, my voice wavering a bit. He turned slowly, his gaze meeting mine. His eyes were empty. There was no warmth, no kindness, just cold calculation. "I heard something," I said, clearing my throat, "from behind the coolers." He was silent for a moment, as if contemplating the right thing to say. He gave me a tight smile, followed by a slight chuckle. "You're hearing things, kid. This place is old. It makes noise," he said, pointing to the ceiling. "There are old pipes and vents everywhere. Don't overthink it." His tone was firm, but there was something in his words that didn't sit right with me. I nodded, but wasn't convinced. As I moved toward the coolers to finish up and clock out for the night, I couldn't help but glance at the back of the shop. The shadows gathered like they were hiding something, concealing secrets that weren't meant to be found. Those thuds weren't in my imagination. They were real. Little did I know I was getting closer to something I wasn't ready to face. The third rule had eaten away at my curiosity the minute I started working there, tearing off pieces of my sanity day after day. George had only mentioned it that first day, but I could feel the weight of it surrounding me. It was inside the walls, always nagging at me, begging and pleading for attention. In the silence between cuts, I would get the urge to look. I had heard and seen enough now to warrant it anyway. Now, I not only wanted a peek, but I wanted to uncover the secret behind cooler number 7. I told myself a quick look wouldn't hurt. I would be in and out before George even knew I had opened the door. I just needed to find the perfect time to do it. The next few nights, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the cot in my cousin's garage, sweat clinging to my back, fan whirring in slow rotations, trying to drown out the sound of that deep thud I'd heard. It echoed again and again in my head. I kept thinking back to certain situations and phrases from him that seemed to turn stranger and darker the longer I thought about them. I thought back to the first truly intense encounter I had with him. George's hand on my arm, his fingers cold and intense. That look in his eyes told me he was studying my loyalty to him and his rules, and I obeyed. My stomach cramped as I replayed the visions in my head. My fealty to him was running thin, and so was my self-control. I desperately needed a break. I didn't go in the following night. I told myself I was sick. Truthfully, I couldn't make myself get out of bed. My hands wouldn't stop twitching. I called George to give him the bad news. He was not happy, saying okay before abruptly hanging up the phone. All day and night, my skin crawled with a feeling like I'd touched something I shouldn't have, and no matter how hard I scrubbed, it was still on me. When I was finally able to sleep, I dreamt of the cooler doors. I was locked inside, unable to break out. I could hear something in there with me, breathing in the dark. I awoke, startled, knowing that I would have to find out what was in there if I ever wanted to have peaceful sleep again. I didn't stay out again. I couldn't afford to, not with the kind of cash he was giving me. When I walked in for my next shift, George didn't say a word. He didn't ask if I felt better or why I had called out sick in the first place. He just tossed me an apron, handed me a list of orders, and went back to cutting like nothing had ever happened. Something had changed. The air felt heavier, and the inside of the shop seemed darker. The coolers hummed louder than usual, mocking me. George's cleaver hit the block with more force than before, sending bone shards skittering across the floor. It was all different.
I just kept my head down and focused on my work, trying not to draw any more attention from him. It was just after midnight when George told me to clean up and prepare the cutting tables for pork while he took care of something in the back. I waited until I heard the door to cooler number 1 close behind him to make my move. I know now why I shouldn't have, but at the time there was no stopping my curiosity. I needed to know. My feet and hands moved on their own. I crept into the hallway and down through the plastic curtains until I stood in front of cooler 7. I stared at the center of the large metal door before slowly lowering my eyes to the handle. The scratches were worse than before, deeper and more numerous. I reached out, touching the handle with just my fingertips. It was warm to the touch, which confused me. These were industrial coolers. There is no reason why they should ever be warm.
I slowly pulled the handle. It clicked and opened just a crack. Cold air hissed out, thick and wet. This was not like the other coolers I had grown accustomed to. A cloying stench poured from the crack in the door, clinging to the inside of my nose and making my eyes water. It was so strong and pungent that it made me take a step back from the door. I had almost considered abandoning my mission, but now this only made me want it more. I pulled the door open further, holding my apron over my nose. I leaned in, pushing my head around the edge of the door. The lighting was dim, flickering in an almost rhythmic fashion. A putrid haze hung in the air, obscuring the edges of the cooler. I squinted, scanning the walls, slowly making my way to the back. The inside was unremarkable. There were meat hooks lining the ceiling, with some large brown boxes haphazardly stacked throughout. I had built myself up to think that George had been hiding something terrible in here, and that there was some experiment that had gone wrong. Yet now that I was here, I could see nothing of the sort. I continued surveying the area. I was not ready to give up yet. I had heard multiple strange sounds from cooler number 7, and the terrible stench emanating from it validated my insistence on pushing further.
Between flickers from the lights, my eyes caught a slight glimmer at the back of the cooler. I pushed my body further inside, trying desperately to identify the source without venturing too far. As I entered, the lights faded, bathing the interior in darkness. My heart jumped. I knew I didn't have much time, and the lights going out didn't help. They buzzed back to life, bathing the walls in sickly yellow light once more. With the cooler now illuminated, I could see to the back of the space. I scanned the back wall from top to bottom, settling my vision between 2 large brown boxes in the middle of the floor. There was something unusual about them. They weren't the normal type that we used. I looked closer, noticing a crack between them that revealed an unobscured view to the back of the cooler. As I focused my vision on the boxes, one of them jolted upward like someone had kicked it. A black silhouette emerged from between them and quickly disappeared behind another box that sat next to them. I nervously jumped, thinking that a giant rat would come scurrying out at any moment. Darkness enveloped me once more, now causing panic to rise in my chest. I am deathly afraid of rats, and I could not stand the thought of one crawling across my feet in the dark.
I took a step back, waiting for the lights to kick back on before proceeding further. I pulled my head out of the doorway, but continued to hold it open so that I could see inside. In the opening between the 2 boxes, where I thought I had seen a rat, I saw the same glimmer shine through again. I focused my eyes on it, trying to decipher what it was. The lights flared, shooting a beam across the front of the boxes. My eyes caught something frighteningly familiar as the light faded. Deep within the cooler, between the boxes, another pair of eyes stared back at me. This was no rat. The eyes were too large and too far apart to be those of any rodent. I thought maybe it was just a carcass that had been laid in an awkward position and I was seeing the glint from its eyes. That thought, however, was quickly rejected. I couldn't fool myself. I had seen enough dead animals to know that their eyes stop reflecting light once they are dead. My heart began to thud faster in my chest, each second producing more anxiety. I stared into the eyes for what felt like an eternity when suddenly I heard a sound that broke me from my trance. It was a voice, just barely above a whisper, coming from deep inside the cooler. It wasn't George, nor anyone else I knew. It was shrill and faint at the same time.
"Help, please," the voice croaked.
I took another step back. My mind had created horrid creatures and hideous abominations that filled the lore of Cooler Number 7. Somehow, I had encountered something much worse. A human. I scrambled backward, slamming the cooler door as quickly as I could. I pushed my hands against it, holding it closed. My heart was beating so fast that I started to feel dizzy from the shock. What was that? I asked myself, shaking violently. I rested my head against the cooler door, trying to calm myself down and steady my breathing. I had almost regained my composure when the sound of George's boots clacking against the tile filled my ears. I heard him exit the cooler and enter the hallway. He didn't say a word, and yet he knew exactly where to go. I turned to see him pushing through the plastic curtain, now standing in front of Cooler Number 6. His apron was drenched with fresh blood that covered almost the entirety of his torso. He held a cleaver in one hand and a towel in the other. His face was emotionless, akin to a stone sculpture, commanding and cold. "You opened it," he said calmly. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. He knew that I had broken the rules. I stammered, trying to explain myself, but the words wouldn't come. George just stood there, staring at me like he'd just found a rat in his pantry. His hand gripped the cleaver harder the longer he looked at me, causing his knuckles to shake with force. I didn't know what to say. I was still frozen from what I'd just seen. He stepped forward, slowly and deliberately, coming to a stop right in front of me.
"I told you not to go near Cooler Number 7, he said in that same cold, scowling tone. "You broke a rule, son." I opened my mouth, trying my best to speak, but nothing came. Every fiber of my being was telling me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. "Did you hear something in there again?" he asked. My throat finally relinquished control of my voice, albeit very weakly. "There was someone inside," I responded shakily. His eyes tightened on me, and his face turned sour like I had just run over his dog. "No," he said flatly, "there wasn't." I opened my mouth to argue, but he cut me off before I could utter another word. "You've been working hard, Tom. I respect that. But this place is old. It will mess with your head if you let it." He pulled his face back away from mine a bit, lifting his expression slightly. "I put rules in place for a reason. It's so nobody gets hurt or worse. You understand, son?" he asked. He was searching my face for an answer, yet I was too scared to give one. He stepped past me and placed his hand on the cooler door. "I keep this one sealed for a reason," he explained. "The temperature is unstable. The lighting is bad. More importantly, it's got a CO2 leak." He looked back at me, making sure to look directly in my eyes. "That gas'll get you. It makes you see things that aren't there, hear things that aren't real." I knew he was lying. He had to be. There was no way he could run a place in that bad of condition. I nodded anyway, seemingly showing him what he wanted to see. He watched me a moment longer, then reached out and ruffled my hair like a parent scolding a child. "You want to keep working here? You follow the rules. All of them." He smiled and turned to walk back toward the cutting room, leaving me standing alone in the freezing hallway.
I stood there for a moment, still too scared to move, pondering what to do next. I couldn't just forget what I heard, and definitely not what I had seen. I slowly made my way back to the cutting room and prepared the last of the orders so that I could finish my shift. I didn't leave right away after my shift ended. I wanted to find out what George did at the end of the night and hopefully see what he kept in Cooler 7. I waited in my car around the corner until I saw the lights go out in the shop. I saw George emerging from the back door, dragging a large bag on the ground. It was wrapped in plastic and twine, glistening red beneath the dim glow of the lone streetlight. I watched as he dragged it to his car. He opened his trunk and with a deep grunt heaved it in. The weight of it falling into the trunk shook the car violently up and down before it came to a rest. I slunk down in my seat as I watched on. He wiped his hands on his work apron before looking around a couple of times in each direction. He untied the straps of his apron and removed it, tossing it in as well. He slammed the trunk closed and drove out of the parking lot and onto Crenshaw Street. I followed him, staying just far enough behind not to raise suspicion. I had to know what he was hiding, and I would soon find out what.
I followed George closely, never letting him leave my sight. Aside from a few trucks, the roads were empty at that time, so I had to be careful not to spook him. We had driven maybe 20 minutes out of town when I saw him start slowing down like he was looking for something. He had just reached an old rundown intersection when he suddenly turned off the highway and onto a dirt road. It led down into a clearing that was surrounded by a grove of trees. I noticed a pull-off on the side of the highway just far enough away from the turnoff that I could still see him and not be seen myself. I pulled over, cut my lights, and sat for a moment, keeping my eyes trained on his movement. Once his tires hit the dirt road, he turned his lights out as well. His car was now only being illuminated by moonlight. I slowly proceeded to follow, careful to remain a good distance behind him. Luckily, I had enough moonlight to see where I was going and could follow the soft red glow of George's taillights as he made his way into the clearing. I crested a small hill where I parked to watch from above. At the bottom, I saw he had stopped and pushed the door open, not having stepped out yet. I cut my engine so I wouldn't alert him. My heart was beating so fast. I had never done anything like this before, and the prospect of being caught scared the hell out of me. I steadied my nerves and trained my focus on George. I was sure he hadn't seen me yet, or he would have taken off. I had the element of surprise on my side, for once in my life. I saw him get out, pop the trunk, and pull the large bundle free, slamming it down into the dirt. He grabbed some other miscellaneous items from his car and proceeded to drag the sack toward the tree line. He soon vanished into the darkness of the woods, leaving behind a silent dread that settled into the early morning air. I didn't follow him immediately. I was too scared to. There was no way I was going into those woods while he was still in there. I chose to wait. For all I knew, George was oblivious to my presence, and I wanted it to stay that way.
I waited, letting the stillness of the night settle in. The silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves, the whispers of the wind, and the frantic pounding of my own heart. My brain desperately pleaded with me to run, but I was trapped. Not in a physical way, but more of a morbid fascination with the nightmare that I found myself in. I had to know the truth. After waiting for about half an hour, I saw George reappear from the forest. His apron and the bundle were both gone. He looked lighter, as if he had been released from something or someone. Through the dim moonlight and residual light from his car, I could see that he was smiling from ear to ear. He looked utterly insane, joyfully strutting back out of the woods without care. He started his car up and drove out of the clearing, taking a separate dirt road that led away from me. I watched as his glowing red taillights bounced across the uneven trail, all the way back onto the main road. He drove without a care, seemingly pleased with what he had done. What that was, I wasn't sure of just yet, but I was determined to find out. I waited until sunrise before I dared to venture into those woods. I wanted to know that he was gone for a while before making a move. The comfort of the morning sun gave me the courage to, finally, creep down to the clearing. I came to a stop a few feet away from where he had been parked, nearly in the same tire tracks, which gave me a strange feeling. I got out of my car and looked down at where he had slammed the bundle onto the ground. I could see his boot prints surrounding the area, followed by drag marks from the sack. There were dark red streaks of what I assumed to be blood soaked into the powdery red dirt, creating a clumped mess following within the drag marks. I followed the trail into the woods, being careful not to step in it or disturb the marks in any way.
Past the first grove of trees, the entire forest fell silent. There were no chirping birds or whispering wind, just the deafening sound of silence. I found an old log next to the trail that caught my interest. It looked to have been lying there for decades. It was dead and decaying, lying half consumed by the earth. The drag marks led straight up to it, stopping there just before going over it. Dried blood covered the old wood, cracking across it like old paint. Deep red streaks stained the majority of the old tree, trickling down to the dirt below. It collected on the ground into a crimson pool, intersecting the drag marks from the trail. This spot was important for some reason. I just needed to find out why. I scanned the entire area, finally looking over it where the tree stump should have been. The ground around it was disturbed, creating a discolored circular area about 5 feet wide. Looking closer, the soil was loose and wet, as if it had been freshly dug. Fresh blood mixed in with the earth, creating a stark contrast against the muted brown and green of the forest floor. My heart pounded against my ribs as I hesitantly took a step closer. I could see something protruding out of the loose soil, just barely visible. A chill climbed my spine as I bent down to get a closer look. I recognized what the object was immediately. Half buried in a shallow pit, I found the sack that George had been dragging hours earlier. My initial attempts to tear it open were unsuccessful. I eventually pulled out my old pocket knife and plunged it deep into the fabric, ripping it downward. A horrific smell erupted from the opening, invading my eyes and nose. The smell was so thick and potent that it forced me to stumble backward. I clasped my forearm across my face, desperately trying to block the intrusive odor. I regained my composure and stepped forward, peering into the jagged hole I had created in the sack. Inside, I saw something staring back at me that I noticed immediately. Freshly stripped bones peeked through the hole in the sack. I examined them closer, noticing something I wish I hadn't. These were not animal bones. Having butchered enough to recognize the difference, I knew that these did not belong to any animal I had ever encountered. No, these were undoubtedly human. Horrified, I stepped back, overwhelmed by the gruesome scene. A putrid cocktail of decay and rot spewed forth, coating the entire area in the stench of death. I pulled my shirt over my nose and stepped back in. I had come this far, and I wasn't going to quit now. I peeled back the cover of the sack with a large stick I had found on the trail side, revealing all of the contents. Butchering meat had almost desensitized me to this type of stuff, but knowing now what this truly was turned my stomach into knots. As the exterior peeled away, the true horror of what George had done came to life. Some of the bones inside still had strips of skin and flesh clinging to them. There were teeth strewn about within the gory mess, as well as a child's shoe, bloodied and lifeless, alongside the viscera. Entrails and discarded muscle mixed into the macabre collection, causing it to coagulate and form a gelatinous mess.
I could feel the acidic vomit rising in my throat. I had to turn away from it, though my curiosity dared me not to. I turned my attention away from the gore and back toward finding out who this person was. I needed to know why George would be out to kill them. At first, I couldn't find any markings or identification for who this might have been. I searched around the area and inside the freshly dug hole next to the sack. At the edge of it, I found a tag. It was one we used at the shop to label cuts. It read, "Shoulder, 4.3 pounds, $19.76. I turned it over, revealing a name scribbled faintly on the back in George's handwriting. Amanda. I threw the tag on the ground. My stomach finally gave in, sending up everything it had within it. This was sick. I couldn't believe I worked for a man who could do this. I ran back to my car, stumbling across the logs and boulders on the trail, the image of the bag's contents filling my brain. I jumped in my car and sped out of the clearing, leaving the horrific discovery behind me. I drove as fast as I could to the police station. When I arrived, I felt a sense of relief washing over me. I just knew that I was going to nail this bastard and put an end to this. I didn't know when he had done this or how long this had been going on, but there was no way I could sit idly by and let it continue. I had known that he was capable of doing something like this for a long time. Seeing it in person was truly terrifying. I walked in and asked to speak with a detective. Surprisingly, the front office manager already knew my name. They said someone had called them about me earlier that day, saying that I had been acting erratically. They said I'd gone missing from a halfway house in South Texas and that I'd been dodging my friends and family for some time. It was all lies. I knew George was behind this. He was always 2 steps ahead of me in everything that he did. I tried to reason with them. I told them about Red Hill Meats and about George's odd behavior. I told them about how he killed a girl and that her remains were half buried in a sack off of Highway 14. I was convinced that I would get justice for the girl by telling the truth. I figured that if a cop were to hear this story, no matter how sketchy the person's background, they would have to at least look into it. They just looked at me, making me feel like I was insane. They told me that Red Hill Meats shut down almost 20 years ago, in 2007, and the owner, George, died of a heart attack the year before that, in 2006. They said that the building had remained abandoned since it closed, but that they couldn't tear it down because George's family had maintained ownership of it. Even though the owner was supposedly dead, the bills were always paid on time, never arousing suspicion from anybody. As long as they got their money, they didn't really care. I demanded that they see for themselves, but they wouldn't listen. "He's a fucking psycho. You've got to believe me. Please, come with me. I'll show you," I pleaded.
I pressed as hard as I could, but the officers did nothing to entertain my rant. They just held their hands out to me and told me to calm down, which had the opposite effect. It wasn't until they threatened me with arrest that I was able to reel myself in. I already had a prior conviction, and I did not want to end up in jail again. "Sir, you need to calm down and go home," the lady at the front desk said calmly. "It sounds like you are having an episode. We can call somebody if you'd like." I looked at the woman in confusion. Anger rose in my chest, erupting before I could stop it. "Episode? What the fuck? I'm not crazy. I'm trying to stop a murderer," I exclaimed in return. "You're going to just sit there on your ass and let that psycho keep killing people?" This seemed to be the last straw, as the two burly officers near the door rushed up to me and grabbed me under each arm. "Sir, you are being trespassed. Please vacate the property now or you will be forcibly removed," one of them barked at me. Though everything in me was telling me not to, I peaceably left without pushing the issue any further. There was no way they were going to listen to me anyway. They had made up their minds and would not be persuaded otherwise. I left the police station defeated, struggling to keep my composure as I trudged through the rain to my car. I knew that George had set me up. He had anticipated my every move. He knew I was on to him ever since the incident in Cooler 7. He had lured me into his web, but why? Why hadn't he just fired me, or killed me for that matter? Why go through all of this? My mind reeled as I drove back to my cousin's place, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windows. I was just a pawn in a game that I didn't understand. My hands began to shake. I knew that now there was no way George could let me live. I knew way too much. I mulled over the thought of running away, ultimately settling on skipping town the following day. If I were ever going to escape him, I would have to run. I had broken a rule, and I knew there would be consequences.
"I'll probably end up in one of those bags," I said out loud to myself, "just like Amanda." The thought sank into my brain, swallowed by a vortex of confusion. I wondered what she had done to deserve such a fate. Did she break a rule, or was she just an unfortunate statistic? A tear formed in the corner of my eye, sliding down my cheek and onto my shirt. I was next in line. I knew what was coming now, and it was up to me to stop it. I pulled into my cousin's driveway, mind still reeling from the last few hours. I scrambled to the door, yanking my keys from my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the key in the lock. To my surprise, when I tried to turn the handle, it turned freely. "Huh, that's strange," I said under my breath. "I guess I forgot to lock the door." My mind was so far away that I didn't think twice about the door being unlocked. I walked into the garage and closed the door behind me. I fell onto my cot, feeling all the emotions from the day washing over me at once. I was disgusted, then sad, and then angry. It was all just one massive lie, and I helped him with it. That's what troubled me the most. For all I knew, I had been helping him cut up people for weeks. As I pondered this new information, I heard a faint thud echo from the bathroom. Immediately, my mind was flooded with flashbacks of Cooler number 7. It was unmistakable. It sounded identical to it. I stood up from my cot and shuffled my way over to the door. The closer I got, the louder it became. I grabbed the bathroom door handle, summoning the courage to enter. It was warm, like someone had just used it. I turned it and quickly pushed the door open, not knowing what to expect.
The door opened, knocking against the rear wall. I quickly stepped in, pushing my way into the space. I was greeted by my cousin John on the floor in the fetal position, bound and gagged. His whole body was covered in duct tape. His eyes and mouth were covered, along with his feet and hands being bound in front of him. He had a t-shirt shoved in his mouth behind the tape, only allowing him to make a weak moaning sound. The light thud I had heard was him trying desperately to bash his shoulder into the wall to get my attention. I rushed to peel the tape off his eyes. Once he saw it was me, he seemed to calm down a bit. Relieved, I went to grab the piece of tape that covered his mouth. As I started to peel it, I saw his eyes widen and fill with fear. He let out a whimper that turned into a muffled scream. "John, it's me. You're safe," I assured him as I pulled the tape. He He screamed again, sounding more desperate this time. His feet slammed against the floor as he pushed his back into the wall, desperately trying to free himself. He hit the drywall so hard that it started to crack. I was holding John's shoulders, trying to calm him down, when suddenly I felt a sharp pain across the back of my head. The pain was immense, but short, as everything went black almost immediately. I don't remember what happened after that. The darkness consumed me for what felt like days.
I awoke to a pounding headache and blurry vision. I tried desperately to shake off the grogginess, but I was too weak to move. After a few minutes of struggling, I was finally able to lift my head to observe my surroundings. I was in a white room surrounded by tall stacks of boxes. Scattered across the floor, fresh pools of blood glistened under a sickening yellow light. The place was all too familiar. I was inside cooler number 7. I could taste the metallic tang of blood in my mouth as my head slowly began to stop swaying. The cold seeped into my skin, causing my muscles to contract. I tried to move, but my limbs were heavy and unresponsive, as if every ounce of strength had been drained from me. My wrists and ankles were bound like John's had been, rendering me immobile and powerless. The refrigeration systems hummed in the background, mixing with the low drone of the fluorescent lights. Now and then I would hear the slow drip of condensation from above, quickly drowned out by the incessant buzzing that filled the room. The familiar scent of blood and decay filled my nostrils, overpowering everything else. I was back in the place I had been forbidden to enter. I never actually saw him do it, but I knew George had done this to me. My mind raced, flashes of the last few days haunting me like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Then the thought hit me. What about John? The fog that enveloped my brain had momentarily cloaked the worry for him behind my own pain and self-loathing. The image of his terrified face was burned into my mind, his eyes wide with fear. He was trying to warn me. He desperately wanted to tell me, but I couldn't understand. I never thought that it would go this far. "What the fuck?" I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible. I twisted my wrists against the duct tape, trying to break free, but it was too tight. Panic started to swell in my chest, threatening to take over all of my senses. I pushed my mind toward worrying about John instead of myself. Where was he? Was he okay? Was he still alive? I couldn't think about myself right now, not after what I had seen. John would never have gotten involved if I had just followed the rules. Suddenly, the door creaked open with a low, eerie groan. The crackling pops from the door's hinges reverberated through my spine, paralyzing me with fear. I froze, holding my breath. George's voice cut through the silence, smooth and cold.
"Good. You're awake."
I tried to focus on him through blurry vision, but all I could see was a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. He stepped into the room, his boots making that familiar echo against the cold, hard floor. His presence filled the room like a toxic cloud. He always had that effect on me, like a predator circling its prey, ready to deliver the killing blow. This time, however, it was different. These meetings were usually met with anger or discontent from him, but this time he seemed happy. "You know," he continued, his tone dripping with amusement, "I always thought you were smarter than this, but I guess I overestimated you." He stepped closer, his grin widening. It wasn't a smile, but more a mask covering the insanity that desperately clawed at it, trying to escape. I was staring into the face of pure evil. "I told you that you would have to follow the rules, did I not?" he asked, still holding that psychotic smile. I didn't answer. I couldn't, honestly. My mouth felt like it was filled with cotton and my head was swimming. He turned to look at me, raising a knife in my direction. It was so familiar. Through the blur and haze, I could see that it was the knife I had found behind the counter a couple of weeks ago. The crimson-red handle stood out against the white background. I could almost make out the strange inscriptions and obscure carvings that covered the blade and handle. Well, with any rule break, there should be a proper punishment that fits the crime, don't you agree? He said, voice booming off the cooler walls. What better place to deliver your punishment than in the place you so desperately wanted to explore? He laughed so loudly and with such force that he doubled over in enjoyment, putting his hands on his knees. His eyes teared up from laughter, causing him to pull his blood-covered apron up to wipe them away. His face, now stained with blood, turned, twisting from a sickening smile into a deathly serious stare. "I hate that it came to this," he said, voice low and sinister. "I hate to have to do this to you, I really do, but you left me no choice, son. I told you that curiosity would cost you."
My throat tightened, but I fought to keep my voice steady. "You're sick, George. This isn't right. I helped you. Let me go," I said, gasping for air. The words barely left my lips, limply reaching the intended target. He crouched down in front of me, eyes gleaming, and pushed the tip of the ornate knife into my chest. I could feel the sharp point dig into my skin, sending a hot, searing pain across my body. "Is that what you think?" he said softly. "Poor boy, you were just a tool, a puppet," he said, slightly tilting his head as he spoke, pressing the tip of the knife further into my chest, drawing blood. "You did help me, though. You helped me build all of this, Tom. You helped me with every single step. I wouldn't have been able to continue my work without you." He turned his head back upright, stretching a smile across his face once more. "You've helped me make people disappear for weeks now." His words sliced through me. I was sent reeling, my mind struggling to process everything he was saying. "No, fuck that! That's not true!" I exclaimed, using all of my strength to push against my restraints. His grin widened further as he stood, pulling the knife away from my chest and taking a step back. "You know, it truly is hard to find good help nowadays. You were a good worker, Tom." He casually walked away from me until he reached the cooler door. He grabbed the edge of it, turning around to look at me just before he stepped out into the hallway. "Rules are rules," he said softly, before slamming the door, locking me in. As George's words swirled around my mind, I started to shake. Tears fell freely from my eyes as I lay on the cold floor of Cooler 7 and cried. Nothing mattered anymore. I was set to become just another number, just like Amanda. An internal clock in my mind started ticking, drowning out the sounds of the cooler. As the ticks rolled by, I thought about what death would feel like. I closed my eyes tight, trying to regain my will to live. I opened my eyes with renewed tenacity. I did not want George to get the satisfaction from me dying in this shithole. I told myself that I was going to get out of here or die trying. The choices were simple: escape or become a permanent part of Red Hill Meats.
The darkness curled around me. The buzzing yellow lights above became my only respite from pure blackness. After George left, the cooler seemed to squeeze tighter, shrinking around me with every breath. The hum of the refrigeration unit grew louder, overtaking all other noise like the droning of insects feasting on rotten flesh. Every move I tried to make was met with pain. My wrists burned from struggling against the restraints, my skin now raw and slick with blood. My breath came in shallow gasps, the cold gnawing at my lungs. I could feel the foul stench of the cooler seeping into my bones, slowly becoming a part of me. I knew I didn't have much time, maybe only minutes at best.
My mind raced, chasing a finish line that was always just out of reach. My thoughts quickly drifted to John. I was the one who put him in the crosshairs of a psychopath. I couldn't just lie there and die. I had to find a way to free myself and search for him. I racked my brain, trying to devise a plan. Every time I thought of something, the sharp sting of the duct tape against my flesh brought me back to earth. I could feel my energy draining by the second. I was exhausted and overwhelmed. I had almost given up when I heard a soft buzzing sound coming from within the room, barely audible amidst all the other sounds. It wasn't the lights. This was different. It was more rhythmic and spread further apart. Bzzz, bzzz, bzzz.
The sound repeated every few seconds. I strained my ears to hear it over the maddeningly persistent drone of the lights. Listening intently, I was able to isolate it. It sounded like something vibrating against a hard surface. At that moment, I knew my mind was playing tricks on me. There was only one thing it could be: a cell phone. The thought of it confused me. There was no way in hell George would have left one in here unless it was all a part of his sick game. I didn't care at that point. I had to take the chance. It was my only option. I scanned the entire room, searching for where he could have possibly hidden it. It sounded like it was coming from the opposite side of the room, inside one of the towering stacks of boxes. I twisted my body, using what little movement I could muster to worm my way toward it. Inch by painful inch, I pulled myself forward, desperately straining through the cold and fatigue. The tape cut deeper into my flesh, sending blood streaming down my arms and onto the floor. In that moment, I didn't care how badly I was hurt or how cold I felt. I needed that phone. Bzzz, bzzz, bzzz. It continued, buzzing, mocking me with its persistence.
After an immense struggle, I was finally able to reach the stacks of boxes. I nudged one with my shoulder as hard as I could, sending it toppling over. It came crashing loudly to the floor, scattering its contents next to me. I used my elbows and knees to roll over onto my stomach, allowing me to observe the contents of the box. A few feet from where it had landed, several blood-stained clothing items lay strewn about, along with a person's hand clutching a buzzing cell phone. It had been cleanly severed at the wrist, a dead giveaway of whose work it was. Seeing a human hand didn't faze me. I had seen worse in the last 48 hours. I didn't even give it a second thought as I used all that I had left in my mind and body to get that phone. That's all I really cared about until I got close enough to see the details of it. The more I looked at it, the more I recognized it. My voice was caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, but my vocal cords had become so weak that I could barely make any sound at all. I turned my attention to the bloody clothing surrounding me, recognizing the pattern of the shirt and the rips in the blue jeans that John always wore. I dismissed it as a mere coincidence, not wanting to believe what I was seeing. I desperately tried to convince myself that it wasn't real. I quickly found that not to be the case. The previous notion I'd had, that I was still a part of George's twisted game, had come to fruition. The hand belonged to John. His class ring, silver with a cracked blue stone, was still on his finger. He never took that ring off. Fear shot through my chest, forcing me to recoil backward. My mouth hung open, trembling from cold and disbelief. He did this to toy with me, knowing how to hurt me. Tears began to well in my eyes as the weight of this new reality settled across my mind. The phone continued vibrating in his palm, his fingers still clutching it as if it were still attached. The screen was smeared with blood, so thick that I couldn't see the numbers underneath.
Noticing this, my brain shook off the shock of the moment and threw me back into self-preservation mode. I had to keep moving. I had to get out of here. As I tensed my muscles, preparing to move closer, a sharp pain shot through my stomach in defiance, pleading with me not to explore further. I closed my eyes and forced myself to slide closer. The screen went dark as the phone stopped buzzing. Silence filled the room, leaving my mind to battle with the thought of encroaching death once more. I desperately strained my muscles, pulling my body directly next to the hand. I didn't want to believe it, and I couldn't say for sure, but in my mind I knew John was dead. The reality quickly hit me that I would soon join him if I didn't get his phone. I pressed my face into the cold floor, nudging the phone with my nose. The screen lit up, revealing the slide lock. John's blood had pooled and dried over it, obscuring it beneath. I tried desperately to angle my face in a way that my nose could swipe the screen and unlock it. I tried several times, but had no success. The stickiness of the blood, coupled with my weak and demoralized state, made for an immense struggle. The constant fight smeared my blood across the floor, covering me in a mess of crimson. I didn't realize how much I was bleeding until I began squirming across the floor in my attempts to unlock the phone. Soon, it started buzzing again. I excitedly pushed my nose harder into the screen. I used a small glob of spit along with the energy I had left to scrape the blood away until I could finally see the caller's name. It read, "Incoming call, Mom." "Aunt Carla!" I exclaimed in excitement. I summoned everything I had left inside my body to crane my neck and jam my chin against the green answer icon. I bobbed my head up and down until I heard the buzzing stop. The call had connected. My head dropped down limply onto the phone, finally allowing me to rest for a moment. Her voice crackled through the speaker, faint and confused. "John? Hello?" she said in panic. "John, please answer. You're scaring me." Physically and mentally drained, I barely mustered up enough energy to answer. I forced air into my throat, enough to scream, but what came out was barely a whisper. "Aunt Carla, it's Tom. I need help. Please, help me. Hurry." I listened intently for a response, but I was met with silence from the other end. A moment or two passed when I heard her voice finally fill the speaker. "Tom, where's John?" she asked with a panicked voice. "Is he with you? Is everything okay?" I tried to explain and tell her where I was, but my body was failing me. My lungs were cold, and my mouth was too dry to utter any more words. The edges of my vision began to blur, tunneling into black. My head involuntarily fell limply against the cold floor in defeat. As the darkness crept closer, I accepted that I was going to die here. I knew what George was going to do to me, the same thing he had done to Amanda and countless others. I would soon be nothing but chopped up pieces in a bag, half buried in the woods. I didn't really care at that point. I had given up. The last thing I heard before I let the blackness completely take over was Carla yelling my name. "Tom, are you okay? Where is John? Tom!" A warm wave of comfort washed over my body as I let the void take me. I could hear Carla's voice echoing into the cooler, getting softer and softer, before finally fading into silence. The darkness brought about a dreamlike state in which everything I had been through in my life seemed to shoot across my mind like a movie.
Snapshots of days past flew by in my memory as I slowly fell further into the abyss. I felt weightless, as if I were sinking into a pool, deeper and deeper as each memory shot across my vision. A black void encircled me, getting closer with each passing memory until it was within inches of my face, beckoning me downward. As it wrapped around me, pulling me down into the darkest recesses of itself, I gave myself to it. Long black tendrils reached upward out of it and wrapped around my legs. The icy sting of its grasp quickly replaced the warmth I had felt prior. I sank slowly into it as the tendrils curled up my body, engulfing more of me with each squeeze. Like a snake devouring its prey, I was being consumed whole. Suddenly, a bright light burst through the darkness, piercing my vision and illuminating everything around me. The light caused the void to fold inward, collapsing in on itself. The black tendrils quickly retreated, releasing my body from its frigid embrace. I started to rise out of its grasp and back upward toward the light. The stinging grip of the blackness gave way, the light taking its place. The warmth did not return. Instead, a brutal, biting cold ran across my body, chilling me to the bone. My hearing began to increase, starting as a low hum and transforming into something that sounded like a voice, quiet and distant. It got louder and louder until I could finally make out what it was saying. It was calling my name. "Tom! Come on, Tom! Stay with us!" The voice boomed, echoing from the source of the light.
The light strobed above me as I breached the surface. As I was pulled back into my cold, depressing consciousness, I was made aware of the gentle warmth of someone's hand resting on my face. The bright light pulsated across my eyelids as I slowly regained my senses. As I opened my eyes, I could see a man in a powder blue shirt with a flashlight pointed directly at my face. "There he is!" the man exclaimed, patting my chest. "Don't worry, we're going to get you out of here." I turned my head to see that the cooler door had been forced open. Police and EMTs surrounded me, flanking me on all sides. I was covered in thermal blankets, shaking uncontrollably, barely alive. They started an IV and strapped an oxygen mask on my face before picking me up on a stretcher. As they began wheeling me out of the cooler, I turned my head, looking around the room in disbelief. As I looked around, I noticed that the room looked completely different. It was cleaner than I remembered. Looking over where I had been lying, I saw that John's phone was still there. It was in the same spot, now encircled by streaks of blood from where my face had slid. As they pushed me out of the cooler and into the hall, I focused harder on it, noticing something strange. My blood was all around it, but his blood was nowhere to be seen. The messy mix of blood and spit that covered the screen had been cleaned off somehow. I stared at it for as long as I could until it left my line of sight. I couldn't get through my delirious mind how that was possible. My face was cut to shit, bleeding heavily from trying to press my nose and chin onto the phone's screen, but you wouldn't know it by looking at the spotless screen. As my body passed through the hallway, exhaustion overtook me, and I finally passed out.
I don't remember much after that. My only thought is that Carla had tracked John's phone and found me just in time. There was no sign of George when they arrived. He had been gone for God knows how long. I told the police about him. I told them what he had done to Amanda and John, but it all seemed to fall on deaf ears. They finally decided to investigate, thanks to the added pressure from Carla to find her son. Armed with the information I provided, they combed through the butcher shop. They'd done a cursory search when they first arrived, but this would hopefully be a deeper dive. I had hoped they would find John. I didn't know if they would find him there.
I just wanted them to find literally anything that connected George to all of this. They searched for days, but found nothing. A detective from the Red Hill Police Department briefed me on their findings, admitting that not even the slightest thing was out of place. The place was spotless. It seemed as though, in the time that I had been unconscious in the cooler, he had pulled the greatest stage act in history, stripping all evidence from the scene. The boxes full of bloody clothes and body parts I had discovered were replaced with standard boxes of packaged meats. There wasn't a single speck of blood on the floor, other than what I had shed. John's hand was missing, of course. I figured George had probably kept it as a sick souvenir. The only remaining item was John's phone. That question was answered for them when Carla explained that I was living with John at the time and had probably borrowed it. It was all bullshit. They chalked it all up to trauma and shock, reinforced by the doctor's diagnosis. They said I had been hallucinating, brought on by oxygen deprivation and blood loss.
They couldn't explain why my hands and feet were bound, eventually labeling it as just a strange attempt at suicide. I should have known from the very beginning that they weren't going to believe me. In their minds, everything about my case had been answered. I had a quote-unquote episode and snuck into the butcher shop. From there, I had gotten stuck in Cooler 7 and then tried to commit suicide. That's the lie that they came up with. George played his game to perfection and then disappeared without a trace. I was no match for him. He'd killed countless people, including my cousin John, before trying to kill me, and nobody would give me the time of day to explain. They continued investigating John's disappearance once they had closed my case, eventually coming back to ask for my help in determining who might have done it when they ran out of leads. No matter how many times I tried to tell them, they would never believe that it was George. "George is dead," they said. "He's been dead for a long time. There is truly no possibility it could have been him." They offered me psychiatric help, but I declined. I had no use for a talking head telling me things that I already knew and trying to throw pills at it to make it better. Fuck that. I chose to just go my own direction and try to heal in my own way.
That should have been the end of it. I should have moved on, gotten alternative help, built a new life. Carla continued to work with and without the police, trying desperately to find John. I knew she wouldn't, but I couldn't tell her that. I couldn't just stop there. The guilt and the overwhelming hatred I felt consumed me. I knew I would have to end that monster's reign of terror one way or another, if not for just the satisfaction in knowing that I'd get revenge for what he did to me. I was the only person who knew who he truly was. I had seen the ugly truth behind the mask. I started digging. I had to know more about him and his victims if I wanted to have a chance at this. Aside from Amanda and John, who else had been involved? I went back through records, archives, and forums until I found more stories about this type of thing. Several stories were eerily similar and seemed to fit the profile that I was looking for. The pattern was unmistakable. There was a story about a teenager who went missing after working a single shift at the shop in 2003, along with a local homeless man who was last seen in 2011 walking behind Red Hill Meats only 4 years after it had been abandoned. Deeper into the forum, I found more. A delivery driver vanished mid-route in 2017, with his last known stop being Red Hill Market, right across the street from the shop. This caused delivery drivers in the area to start carrying weapons on their routes. One of the saddest ones I saw was a chilling blog post from 2020, written by a guy named Dave who'd done a food documentary in the area. He was visiting local restaurants and had posted about a few before he just stopped posting altogether. Over 1 million followers and a high reputation on the internet, all ripped away in the blink of an eye.
I started making a list. By my count, at least 12 people who had a connection to George in some way had vanished over the last 20 years, with God knows how many more that went undocumented. There were no bodies, no suspects, and no leads. It all made sense now. The man I had worked for used people to get what he wanted and then threw them away like trash once he was done. The worst part was that I had been complicit in that activity. I knew something felt off when I first started working there, but I was too scared and being paid too well to say anything. My snooping around seemed to have got George's attention. I started to have weird feelings when I was out in town, like someone was watching me. For a week after my research, I received several phone calls a day, all of which were filled with the buzz of fluorescent bulbs and slow, steady breathing in the background of the call. I just ignored my phone after that week. I was trying to lay low, using the money I had saved to rent an apartment. It seems as though that didn't work either. I received a strange package 2 weeks ago that validated everything for me and strengthened my pursuit even more. I came home to a plain brown box sitting on my porch. There was no return address or identifying markings. All it had was my address and a paid postage sticker for the shipment. I figured I must have ordered something and didn't remember, but something felt off about it. I grabbed my pocket knife and opened it. Seeing the contents nearly made me puke immediately.
Inside was a strip of cured meat wrapped in vacuum-sealed plastic. Attached to it was a picture of me at my desk researching George's victims on the computer. It had been taken from outside my apartment window. As I picked the picture up in my shaking hands, something fell from behind it and back into the box. I set the photo down on the table and looked back in to see John's class ring lying on top of the meat. The same cracked blue stone stared back at me, still coated in dried blood. I closed the box and threw it across the room in anger, letting my emotions get the best of me. That night, I packed all my things and moved out. I had to keep moving so as not to be an easy target. I had saved all the money I had made to afford a temporary place, and yet here I was, moving again. As I was pulling the door of the apartment closed, something caught my eye. A slight glint drew my focus to the corner of the living room. John's ring lay half buried in the carpet, its cracked sapphire blue stone gleaming in the moonlight. I hurried back inside to grab it. I held it in my palm, staring at my reflection in the silver band. A single tear landed in my hand as I wrapped my fingers around it. I thought about John and how desperately I wanted to get justice for what George had done to him. I stuffed the ring in my pocket and finally made my way out to my car to leave. It's been a couple of weeks since I left the apartment. I've stayed on the move, not staying more than a few days at any one place. I've only seen George once since then. It was a late Thursday night. I was staying at a cheap motel 2 towns over, trying to get away from the madness. I came out of the bathroom to get ready for bed when something familiar hit me. It felt like I was being watched again. All that time spent under George's strict scrutiny had made me keenly aware when someone was watching me. I walked over to the window and peeled back the curtain with my finger to look out. The parking lot was sparsely filled with cars. There was a small diner across the street that was open 24/7, casting a bright yellow glow across the road and into the motel parking lot. I peered further down the road, where about a block away, a bus stop sat illuminated by a single streetlight. The light flickered, briefly lighting the area underneath the stop's awning. As my eyes wandered into the darkness beneath it, I saw a man standing there. I squinted harder, struggling to make out details in the hazy dark. As if by some paranormal timing, the streetlight pulsed brightly, allowing me to see the man's features. He was unmistakably familiar. Before I knew it, I had locked eyes with the man who had caused me so much pain.
George, the root of my torment, just stood there looking at me. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He just stared at me like a predator eyeing its prey. Then, in a seemingly friendly motion, he raised a hand and moved it back and forth like he was waving hello or maybe goodbye. By the time I got my phone and looked back out the window, he was gone. Like a ghost, he had disappeared again.
That brings me to where I am now. I don't know when he's coming, but I know he will. He has to. I am the next one on his list, and the only one who truly knows him. I was supposed to die in cooler number 7. I was supposed to be his next victim, and yet I'm still here. I have devoted my life to stopping him, no matter what it takes. I haven't slept for a couple of days. Every sound makes me jump. I've got weapons stashed all over this rental cabin, along with traps that are rigged up by the doors and windows. I sleep in short bursts, just in case I can't wake up fast enough when he comes. If this page goes dark, or if you never hear from me again, you'll know why. If you're reading this, do yourself a favor and stay the hell away from here. Don't go looking for him, and don't come looking for me. Don't be a hero. He's been doing this for a long time. He knows how to make people disappear without a trace. I know he's coming for me, but I have nothing left to lose. There's no reason for anyone else to die. He wants me, and I swear to God I'll kill him if it's the last thing I ever do. My only request is that if and when I die, somebody please show this to my Aunt Carla. She deserves to know the truth about what happened to her son. I can't bear the thought of seeing her face, knowing that her only child is dead. I just don't have the heart to do it. But maybe in these words, as fragile and faltering as they are, she'll find what I never could. Hopefully, she finds the courage to forgive and the strength to carry on, even when the truth cuts deeper than the lie ever did.
I'd spent just shy of a week cooped up in that dingy cabin, waiting for George to make his move. I spent countless nights strangled by fear and paranoia to the point that I had almost forgotten what was real anymore. It's possible that out of some twisted turn of fate, or perhaps because he wanted to play with my head, he let me live and allowed me to run for so long. At least that's what I believe. Last night, he finally showed up. He must have been studying me because he knew everything. Every trap I had laid, every fail-safe I had installed, he knew where everything was. I should have been smarter about it, but then again, I asked for this. It all started with the lights. I don't have a great relationship with them anymore after the incident in cooler number 7, so I normally wouldn't keep too many on if I could help it. It was a dark, moonless night, so I needed more of them on than usual. I had just started dinner when they started to flicker. Being so deep in the woods, this would have been a normal occurrence if they had not done it twice in rapid succession before going out completely. Alarm bells went off in my head immediately. "He's here," I said under my breath as I ran to the window in the corner of the cabin, crouching beneath it. A bolt of fear ran through my chest as the room plunged into darkness. My senses heightened, flooding my veins with adrenaline. I knew that I would have to be sharp if I had any chance against him. I didn't want to waste my opportunity. The only sound filling the void was the slow, rhythmic tick of an old antique wall clock. Its steady ticking seemed to ratchet the tension even higher. I stood motionless, adrenaline pumping, waiting for him to make a move. I knew it was him. I could feel it. I rested my hand on the shotgun mounted under the windowsill and pushed my ear to the wall, listening for movement outside. My heart was beating so fast that it thudded in my ears, muffling any sound that I thought I heard. Suddenly, I heard a shuffling sound just outside the wall, like boots over gravel. It was time. I wasn't going to let him get away. I pulled the shotgun out of the mount and racked a shell into the chamber. I was ready and willing to either kill him or die trying.
I listened closer, trying to pinpoint his position when the shuffling stopped altogether. A quiet calmness settled over the room, filling me with anticipation. I didn't like the silence. It set me on edge because I didn't know what he was doing out there. I pulled my ear away from the wall and began to raise my head to peer out of the window. My eyes were inches away from cresting the windowsill when I heard the sound of something heavy slamming onto the wood on the back porch. I froze as the sound of heavy footsteps trudged up the stairs. "Fucking idiot," I huffed, shaming myself for being so careless. I should have known he wouldn't try to come through the front door. He's too smart for that. Suddenly, 3 soft knocks echoed from behind the back door. I didn't budge. I stood up, resting the butt of the shotgun on my hip, and turned the muzzle toward the back door. I pushed my back against the wall next to the window and set my position. If he wanted me, he was going to have to come inside and get me. I hadn't felt fear up to this point, but I felt an ever so small amount of it slither up my spine. My heart boomed in my ears as I stared at the door handle, waiting for what followed. I was prepared to kill him when he came through the door. What I was not prepared for was what actually came next. What followed the knocks scared me more than the anticipation of him actually busting through the door.
A low, wet, dragging sound filled the room. It sounded like something was being pulled across the porch boards. The fabric sounded like sandpaper scraping against the wood, coming to a stop right at the base of the door. Something heavily slammed down on the porch with a wet, squelching slap, startling me. I stepped back, pushing harder against the wall. I raised the shotgun to my shoulder and leveled it at the door, waiting for him to break it open. I steadied my heartbeat by focusing on the small brass bead, which was now squarely centered in the middle of the door. I heard what sounded like fabric being ripped, followed by another heavy thud. This one was closer to the door, possibly on it. It slammed into the wood, causing the doorframe to creak and moan from the stress. This one sounded more metallic, like metal on metal. I tightened my grip on the gun as I braced for the worst. My nerves had reached a fever pitch. I slid my finger across the trigger and pressed my cheek firmly into the stock. Just when I thought he was about to rush in, the pounding suddenly stopped. A weird, uncomfortable silence fell over the room. All I could hear was the eerily faint chirping of crickets outside, as if they were holding back in suspense, waiting for something to break the silence.
The footsteps proceeded to move away from the door, slow and cautious. The boards squeaked loudly, complaining from the weight of each heavy step. My heart pounded like it was trying to burst free from my chest. I slowly took a step forward, trying to follow the sound with my ears. I listened closely as the footsteps descended the steps and faded into the night, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The lights flickered again, finally returning to bathe the cabin's interior in their glow. As my eyes refocused and adjusted to the light, I spotted a small yellow scrap of paper lying on the floor just past the door threshold. It had been shoved in over the top of the sill and through the crack at some point. I never saw it come through. I was so focused on the shotgun's front sight bead that I didn't notice anything else. I crept forward and picked it up. Just a single word, scrawled in dried blood, was written on it. Enjoy.
As I studied the note, I became aware of a putrid smell that was emanating from just outside the door. It smelt like rotten meat, oddly sweet and metallic. I stepped to the door, wrapping my hand around the knob. In my other hand, I held the shotgun, bracing it against my hip and keeping it pointed straight ahead just in case. I took a moment, trying to drum up the courage to explore the source of the smell. I gritted my teeth and swung the door open, ready to fire. I was met with an empty porch. There was nobody there. I know how it sounds, but I had prepared myself to pull the trigger as soon as I saw the person on the other side, without hesitation. I was mentally prepared to spend the rest of my life in prison if it turned out not to be him. I had gotten that desperate. I scanned the area around the porch and just off the base of the stairs. There was no sign of anyone. I pulled my attention back to the porch, finally letting the shotgun lower down to my side. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, allowing my heart to slow down a bit. I opened my eyes and looked back at the stairs. A fresh trail of blood led up to the base of them and ascended right up to the door, pooling around the porch mat. It slowly ran over the floorboards, dripping down into the crawl space below. I followed the trail with my eyes toward the door. The stream of blood led behind the door and then seemed to travel up the back of it. I took a step forward, peering around it, where I was startled to see something hanging on it. Blood poured from the object, pooling onto the porch below. I jumped back just as the smell hit me. The horrific stench of death crawled into my nose, sending me backward and away from it. I pulled my shirt over my nose and slowly pulled the door back to me so I could see what this thing was. I pulled it back enough to see the outer side, revealing why the earlier thuds had been so loud and metallic. A long strip of raw meat had been nailed to the door, soaking it with blood. I noticed that something was tied to it, dangling below. It was covered in blood, but it didn't take me long to figure out what it was. To my horror, dangling at the end of the rope was John's rotten, decaying hand. His class ring was now snugly back on his finger. "What the fuck?" I exclaimed. There was no way this could be true. I had put that ring in the drawer of my bedside table when I got to the place. I hadn't moved it, and yet it was now back on its owner's finger. I staggered back inside, pulling the door closed behind me. I bolted every lock, which became a much harder chore due to how badly my hands were shaking. I stumbled backward into the kitchen, not letting the back door out of my sight. No matter how I felt about it previously, I needed to be bathed in as much light as I could find. I continued to stumble backward away from the door. The kitchen countertop pushing into my lower back was my sign to stop. I put my hand down on it to hold myself up. The adrenaline was subsiding, letting fear and doubt creep their way back in. My body was shaking so much that I couldn't hold on to the shotgun anymore. I laid it down on the kitchen counter and splashed my face with cold water from the sink. I reached into the drawer below, pulling out the matches to light the stove. I had to try to get back into some semblance of a routine, or I would have actually lost my sanity. In addition, I was starving. With everything that had happened in the last hour, it felt like I had burned 10,000 calories from the stress alone.
I turned around to grab a pot, trying to stay focused on the task at hand. As I stood back up, I turned, clanging the pot onto the stove eye. Staring into the empty pot, my brain forced me to do a double take. I swore I had seen something out of the corner of my eye when I turned with the pot. My eyes had involuntarily flicked over to the entrance of the hall leading to my bedroom as I turned, catching a dark shape moving in the hallway. I whipped my head in that direction, squinting into the darkness. A silhouette crossed my vision, moving out of my bedroom and toward the living room. It stopped in the middle of the entranceway, allowing me to get a better look. That's when I saw him. George was inside the cabin. His reflection stared back at me from the living room mirror just outside the kitchen door. I grabbed the shotgun from the table and spun it toward him. I focused my vision on where I had seen him, but there was nothing there. He had vanished again. Panic swallowed me whole. I tore through the house with the shotgun raised, checking every door, lock, and trap. Nothing had been triggered, and no signs of entry anywhere. Was he even here at all? I asked myself, thinking that the lack of sleep had caused hallucinations that must have created a vision of him. No, I knew he was in there with me. There was no other explanation. I'm not crazy. I hardly slept after that. I sat in the corner with the gun on my lap, staring at the back door for hours. Every creak and groan the cabin made sent a jolt through my body. Though the stinging burn of exhaustion clawed at them, my eyes remained locked on the back door. He had me in a chokehold of fear. Every time the floor creaked or a wind gust pressed against the windows, my brain spiraled into panic. I could feel his presence hanging in the air like a dense fog, thick and oppressive, suffocating me with every breath I took.
The hours dragged on. Shadows shifted across the walls, stretching and contorting as if they were alive. My whole body ached. I had clenched my muscles for so long that they began to cramp and seize. My nerves were frayed from the endless psychological torment the darkness brought with it. I could hear my blood pumping through my ears, a steady drumbeat filled with fear and expectation. The hours continued to roll by, one after another. The shotgun felt like an anchor sitting on my lap, becoming heavier and heavier, mirroring my weakening resolve. I stayed vigilant through the night, keeping my eyes glued to the door for as long as I could. Just after 3:30 this morning, my body began to betray me. My eyelids became heavy and defiant, finally drooping across my vision and obscuring the door. I tried to fight it, but I was so exhausted that I couldn't take it anymore. My eyelids closed, defying my command. Darkness enveloped me, wrapping its sticky fingers around my consciousness and pulling it under the surface. Sleep had finally come, but it didn't bring rest. Instead, it brought visions of terrifying clarity, memories I had tried to forget twisted into nightmares. My deepest fears were given flesh. An amalgamation of horror rose before me, shifting and contorting like an obelisk made of pure fear. The structure opened, revealing a road made of white bricks leading into a never-ending abyss of black. The next thing I knew, I was walking down the path, unable to stop myself. I walked for what seemed like miles before I finally came to the end. The road came to an end, dropping into a pit of nothingness underneath it. My body continued to push me forward, involuntarily walking me up to the edge. I yelled and screamed to stop, but it didn't listen. I closed my eyes as the last step was taken, sending me tumbling off the road and into an endless fall.
When I opened them, I found myself back in the cooler. The air was thick with the smell of death and rot. George stood at the entrance. His head was cocked to the side like a predator observing its wounded prey struggle. His eyes gleamed like orange glowing pinpricks of malevolence in the dark. He smiled as he began walking toward me. I tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but nothing came. My body was still paralyzed. All I could do was watch him come closer, step by agonizing step, as the walls closed in and the cooler door slowly creaked closed, plunging me into deep, absolute darkness. As the blackness spilled through the room, George's eyes grabbed my attention, becoming the only thing left that was still visible, continuing to inch closer and closer.
I awoke with a jolt. My phone had woken me up and was buzzing in my pocket. I was out of breath and sweating profusely from enduring whatever the hell I had just been through. The fog encircling my brain finally cleared enough that I remembered the door. My eyes widened at the realization as I threw the shotgun up to my shoulder, aiming at the center of it. There was nobody there. Everything was locked, and as it should have been. I slowly dropped the gun back to my lap, now trembling with fear. I rested my head against the wall, trying to calm myself down and slow my heart rate. Once the adrenaline had subsided, the buzzing in my pocket became more noticeable. I scrambled to pull it out, fumbling with it before holding it up to my face. I squinted my eyes to see the number through the fog of sleep. Unknown caller. I silenced it and let it ring, hoping that it was nothing more than just a telemarketer. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to shake the visions out of my head. I felt my phone stop buzzing, which caught my attention. I looked down at it once more, hoping for validation that it was a spam call. My heart sank when the voicemail notification popped up. Those calls never leave voicemails, and even if they do, they're only a couple of seconds at most. This one was 2 minutes long. My hands began to tremble as I pressed the play icon. Through the speaker, I could hear a voice. My voice. It was a recording of me, calling out weakly in the cooler weeks ago.
Aunt Carla, it's Tom. I need help. The entire phone call played over the voicemail, sending me right back to cooler number 7. All of the fear, trauma, and emotion that I felt in that place returned in an instant. I listened as my words weakly trailed off into silence, followed by a loud click. It sounded like someone pressing a button on an old cassette player once it had finished playing. I heard George's voice pick up shortly after, calm and deliberate as always. I told you, Tom, we finish what we start. I threw the phone on the ground at my feet and kicked it across the room. It bounced across the uneven floorboards, coming to rest within a foot of the back door. I sat, staring at it in a daze, not knowing what to think. My eyes burned, screaming for relief, but I couldn't look away. I just couldn't. Eventually, dawn broke. Sunlight pierced through the thinly veiled windows, covering the cabin's interior with warm, orange light. I had spent the entire night sitting on the kitchen floor, clutching a 12-gauge, too afraid to sleep. The sun's warm embrace was a welcome change. Once the cabin was filled with light completely, I was able to stand up. My legs were weak from sitting in the same position for so long. My muscles ached from the strain, screaming at me in pain. It felt like I had been in a car crash. I racked the shell out of the shotgun and slid it back into the magazine for safety. I wasn't in the best mindset at that moment, and if the mailman had knocked on the door, he may have gotten a faceful of buckshot. I composed myself and began formulating a plan for the day. There was no way I was going to just sit around in the cabin and wait for him to come back. I needed to get out. I needed to move again. I loaded up my car with everything I could carry and drove. I didn't have a plan or a direction, just an ambition to leave as fast as possible. I just needed to get away from that place. The further I got, the closer the shadows seemed to follow behind me, lingering in my mind like a cancer, eating away at what little sanity I had left. Every rearview glance produced a spike of anxiety that no amount of radio music could quell. I expected to see his face in the mirror every time I looked back, sitting in the back seat, ready to strangle me to death. Eventually, I found myself back in Red Hill. I don't remember turning the wheel or how I even had enough gas to make it, but I was back. I don't know how much stock I put into believing in fate, but it needed me to come back here. It demanded it. The butcher shop stood there like usual, silent and empty. Physically, it hadn't changed, but something was telling me that this time was different. I pulled up and parked across the street from it. I sat, staring at the front door as visions of the torment this place inflicted on me flashed through my head. I grabbed the shotgun from the back seat and racked a shell in before proceeding to walk to the front door. I stopped just as I stepped onto the sidewalk, taking a second to gather myself. I tightened my grip on the gun and pushed myself to continue toward the door. "If this is it," I said as I grabbed the door handle, "then I will take that son of a bitch with me."
To my surprise, the door was stuck. It felt like something was blocking it from the inside. I forced it open, pushing several heavy boxes out of the way, and stepped in. I proceeded cautiously, observing the interior with the shotgun raised. The inside of the shop was in pristine condition. The floors had been polished. The knives were all arranged by size and type. The place was put together with surgical precision and detail. I laid my hand down on the counter, reliving old memories. Not all of this place was evil, just the man who ran it. The air had a strong scent of bleach, sanitized and cold. It wasn't very often that the place was ever this clean. I imagine because of everything that had happened and with the police snooping around, George had to slow down and clean up his act. I slowly made my way behind the counter, pushing the plastic curtains aside with the barrel of the shotgun. I warily passed through, examining the hallway as I went. There wasn't anything really remarkable about the hallway, just that it was immaculately clean. The place I knew had never been this clean, ever. I passed each cooler, pulling each of them open just a crack to peek inside. Cooler numbers 1 and 2 each contained several pig carcasses, along with some already packaged meat. Coolers 3 through 5 all had large cuts of beef on hooks. Large rib racks, brisket, and untrimmed loins hung from them, all beautifully cut with precision. From what I remembered, the floors inside the coolers were covered in blood and half-empty boxes, but here and now, they were spotless. I proceeded to the end of the hallway, gun still raised and ready. Once again, I pushed the plastic curtains aside with the gun barrel, this time with my finger firmly pressed against the trigger. This was it. This was where it all happened. If he were here, this is where he would be. As I passed through the curtains, I could see that the door to cooler number 7 was open, with a faint light flickering inside. I passed by cooler 6 and slowly crept toward the opening to 7. My body forced me to stop, once again sending flashes across my mind filled with the horrific things I had seen and endured inside this place. I closed my eyes, trying desperately to push them away. I took a deep breath, shook my head, and stepped in. The moment my boots hit the tile, everything came flooding back. The smells, the cold, the lights, they were all the same. Preoccupied with nostalgia, I didn't maintain eye contact with the door. That was my biggest mistake, as it slammed hard behind me, reverberating across the cooler walls. I spun around and grabbed the handle, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. My fingers cramped as I tried desperately to grasp the handle. I couldn't get a grip. My hand kept sliding off of it, leaving only faint scratches from where my knuckles hit the metal. It was jammed tightly closed, as if it had been welded shut. I was trapped, just like before. Rage built inside of me, coming to a head. I could feel myself losing control. He had done it again. He had manipulated me right into his hands without having to do much at all. I had walked right back into the place I had sworn I would never enter again. I slammed my fist into the door several times, letting the anger flow out of me. Blood smeared the pristine white surface from where my knuckles had impacted it.
The sharp sting grounded me, reminding me that I couldn't afford to lose control of my senses. Not now.
I closed my eyes and took a slow, shaky breath. The pain in my hand helped me to refocus my thoughts, subduing the immense rage I had been harboring. Anger was not going to help me survive here. I needed to think. Somehow, I needed to be smarter than him. I exhaled through gritted teeth, flexed my fingers, and turned around to examine my surroundings. I knew the place fairly well. I was confident I could find a way out. The walls still bore faint bloodstains from decades of use, no matter how hard they had been scrubbed. The floor was still marked with my blood. I could see the circle where I had made that fateful phone call. I scanned the rest of the interior, feeling along the walls, when all of a sudden a familiar faint humming sound filled the air. I looked up to the lights, still producing that sickly yellow glow. The flickering fluorescent bulbs illuminated the cooler more than I remembered. The room was cleaner than I remembered, too. Yet in my mind, no matter how clean or nostalgic the place was, nothing could erase the memories of what happened there. The hooks above me swayed gently, even though the air was still. Something about it all felt staged, as if I were walking into a movie scene. Suddenly, I heard a deep, resonant groan from within the cooler walls. A loud clanking sound was followed by the sound of two pieces of metal scraping against each other. The side of the cooler was opening. The thick insulation parted, revealing a seam in the wall where a hidden door opened into Cooler 6.
I raised the shotgun at the opening, heart racing, producing a frantic pounding in my head. I fought the primal urge to flee as the light steadily filled the doorway. Like smoke leaking into the room, the acrid scent of blood and bleach flowed out of the opening, wrapping around me. I tightened my grip on the shotgun, desperately trying to steady my shaking hands. A silhouette pressed its way through the darkness and into the opening, now standing in the middle of the doorway. An old leather boot shot out of cooler number 6, slamming down onto the floor in front of me. I pushed my cheek into the gun stock, focusing on the front bead as the figure stepped through the threshold. It was him. George emerged from the odd cooler entrance, now standing just a few feet from the shotgun's muzzle. His eyes gleamed with cold, calculating madness. I noticed him clutching a knife in his hand that looked strangely familiar. The light flickered across it, and I recognized it immediately. The crimson handle shone out against the white background of the cooler walls. The strange inscriptions and symbols seemed to glow orange as the light flowed across the blade.
"I knew you'd come back," he said, voice low and rasping like steel dragging across a stone. "But then again, you never really left, did you?" My grip tightened, my finger twitching against the trigger. "This ends now, George," I said, voice shaking. He took a slow step forward, holding the knife in front of him. "It never ends, son," he said coldly. "No matter what happens right here and now, we will always be here. Like the blood on these walls, we will always remain. I will always remain." He took another step closer, coming to within inches of the barrel. "You better fucking stop," I exclaimed shakily. "I'll fucking kill you." I was breathing heavily. The stress and intensity of the situation got to me. I had told myself hundreds of times that I wouldn't hesitate when I had this chance, and yet I couldn't pull the trigger. "You gonna shoot me, son?" he asked, holding his arms out wide as he slowly inched closer.
I gritted my teeth as I tried with all my might to pull the trigger. My fingers spasmed, locked in position, just barely putting pressure against it. He took one more step, looking down at the barrel as he pushed himself into it, pressing it to the center of his chest. He looked up at me, curling a smile across his face. "Didn't think so," he said, staring into my eyes.
Suddenly, with one swift motion, he grabbed the barrel and pushed it to the side. I reacted as fast as I could, pulling the trigger. The shotgun erupted with a thunderous blast. The cramped space transformed into a suffocating chamber filled with deafening noise and blazing heat. For a split second, everything went blank. My ears rang loudly as if a swarm of angry bees had taken residence inside my skull. My senses clawed back slowly, the ringing fading into a dull throb, allowing the buzzing of the lights to take over once more. My vision cleared, and the weight of the shotgun settled back into my hands. My mind had already created the picture of George lying on the cooler floor, decimated by the buckshot, but he was faster than that. He had ducked around it. Stunned by the gunshot, he stood shaking his head, trying to regain his senses. His strong, calloused hand maintained its grip around the shotgun barrel, controlling my movement with it. He turned his head to face me, anger filling his face. Without warning, he lunged at me, disregarding my weapon. Everything seemed to slow down, as if time were moving at half speed. The blast had thrown us both into a dizzying haze, but he was still coming at me. I dropped to the side, just as he reached out to swipe at my throat. The blade missed its mark, skimming across my shoulder, slicing through fabric and skin alike, and cutting me from my collarbone to my bicep. Searing pain flared across my body, but luckily I was able to hold on to the gun.
"Why?" I screamed, swinging the butt of the shotgun and connecting with the side of his head. He staggered, falling into the cooler wall to brace himself. I wasn't going to let this chance slip away from me again. I quickly turned, raising the shotgun and leveling it at the side of his head. My hands were rock steady. There were no more jitters. It was time to end it. I aimed and pulled the trigger. Click. "Fuck!" I loudly exclaimed. I forgot to rack in the next shell. Panic overtook me as I fumbled with the pump. George turned toward me, wild hate filling his eyes, lunging at me again. This time he connected, tackling me into the wall of hanging hooks. The shotgun was sent flying, eventually landing in the middle of the cooler floor a few feet away from us. He pressed me against the hooks harder. The metal dug into my back as we struggled, cutting me in several places. Blood ran down the front of my shirt, covering us both. His arms now slick with my blood, he pulled me away from the hooks and slammed me against the opposite wall, his face pressed up close to mine, his breath hot and foul on my face. I struggled mightily, using the blood to slip from his grasp and push him back away from me. I thought I was gaining some ground until I felt the cold tip of the knife press against my ribs. I froze, slowly pulling my eyes up to meet him. I could feel the sharp tip puncture my skin as I breathed in, creating an oscillation of pain with every inhale and exhale. He smiled, inches from my face, like he was savoring it.
"Just like old times, huh, kid?" he whispered. He may have cornered me, but I wasn't a kid, nor was I the same person who had answered his ad. I had beaten him once, and I was determined to do it again. I brought my knee up into his gut, hard. He reeled back, dropping the knife from my chest. He began coughing, holding his stomach with his hand. I used the opening to push my back against the cooler wall, preparing for him to rush me again. He recoiled quickly, still holding his stomach as he leaped toward me. He swung at me wildly with his knife, producing the opening I had been looking for. I waited for him to raise the knife before ducking down and underneath his outstretched arm. I went to the ground and rolled past him toward the center of the cooler.
His momentum carried him past me, his knife connecting with the cooler wall. The blade sank halfway into the thick insulation and became stuck. I fell out of the roll, lying flat on my stomach. I looked back at George, who was desperately pulling at the knife, trying to yank it free from the cooler wall. As I reached over to grab the shotgun, he saw me and started screaming as he tore across the cooler toward me. I quickly rolled over, pulling the gun across my chest. He tried to lunge down at me, but I had made it onto my back before he could get into position. As he fell downward, I quickly pushed the shotgun up to meet him, jamming the barrel under his chin.
Time once again seemed to stand still as I saw the hate in George's eyes dissipate, if only for a moment. He looked down at me, wrapping that mad smile across his face. "You're not gonna kill me," he said, chuckling lightly. "You don't have it in you." I stared into his eyes as I wrapped my finger around the trigger, steady and firm. This time, I racked in a new shell. The husk of the spent one fell to the floor, clinking across the tile before rattling to a stop. You could hear a pin drop in that brief moment. I saw George's eyes widen even more, a semblance of fear sweeping across them. "Goodbye, George," I said calmly, the slightest bit of shakiness showing through. His face twisted into a snarl as his anger began to burst through. "No!" he screamed as he swung his fists toward me. I closed my eyes and pushed my finger firmly against the cold trigger, releasing a full load of buckshot into the bottom of George's face. I felt a warm, wet liquid explode across my face, startling me with its unexpected arrival. The impact felt like a sudden, localized downpour of rain on my skin. It clung uncomfortably to my face, slowly dripping down my cheeks and mouth. I quickly turned over, dropping the shotgun to the ground. It clattered against the floor, signifying the finality of the moment. The metallic taste of blood filled my nose and throat, causing me to gag and vomit as my body rejected the foul liquid. I wiped my face with my shirt, but it didn't help much. It was covered in my own blood, as well as his blood and bone fragments. I finally wiped enough away to clear my vision, looking down at my feet toward George. His body had dropped instantly and was now lying limp on the cooler floor. Where his face used to be was now a black, smoking hole, pouring blood out of it and across the floor. I sat up quickly, pulling my legs away from his body. I already had enough of his blood on me. I didn't need any more. The room was spinning. My ears were ringing, causing a splitting headache to penetrate my skull. I sat for a moment, examining the alien scene, not fully believing it was real. Blood was splattered across the floor, painting over decades of old stains. The contents of George's sick and twisted mind now lay in small fragments, strewn across my face and torso. I fell back onto the floor, panting, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. I was so exhausted. I wanted to continue lying there, but something in me told me to get up and keep moving. I pulled myself up to my feet and walked over to where I had tossed the gun. I reached down and grabbed it, squeezing tightly to counteract the slick layer of blood covering it. I walked over and was finally able to pull George's blade from the wall, using it to pry the side door open into Cooler 6. I jiggled the latch on the main entrance door to the cooler until it finally gave, opening into the hallway. I stumbled out into it, dragging the gun behind me. Bloodied but triumphant, I staggered out to my car with a wide smile on my face. I climbed in and sat holding the steering wheel for a minute or two. Everything finally hit me all at once. I rested my forehead on the top of the steering wheel and sobbed. The journey was not over, but the mission for revenge had been completed.
I drove as fast and as far as I could, never once looking back. I don't remember how far I thought I would go or where I thought I was going to end up. All I remember is the deafening silence and the feeling of sticky blood drying on my skin. That was just over 7 hours ago.
I'm writing this from a motel in Bardwell. I ended up stopping by the emergency room once I got into town. After a fairly short wait, I ended up with 36 stitches in my shoulder, a tetanus shot, and an antibiotic from where he cut me. I'm surprised he didn't kill me, honestly. I'm exhausted. I've barely slept in the last few days. I can't, honestly. Every time I close my eyes, I see him. I can hear his raspy voice and smell that stench of rot mixed with bleach. Sometimes, as if summoned by the very memory still fresh in my brain, the stale air of the motel room seems to thicken, wrapping around me like a blanket of unrelenting fear and regret. The shadows in the corner deepen, becoming darker than the darkest night. Sometimes I can almost feel the phantom chill of the cooler air, the weight of the shotgun still heavy in my hands. The putrid scent of death and decay fills the room, stinging my nose and eyes. The world outside this cheap room fades away, replaced by the visceral, echoing reality of what happened in that place. But now, I can feel something else beneath the trauma, something better. A flicker of something fragile yet undeniable is starting to grow. I finally feel hope.
It's not much, but it's enough to keep me going. I don't know how long I can run from it or how many more roads I can drive down before the nightmares swallow me whole, but for now, it's enough. I don't know what I'll do next. I've already left my life behind. Aunt Carla won't miss me. Hell, the times I saw her at the police station, she barely wanted to even look at me, let alone talk to me. I plan to send in the paperwork to change my name in the next few days, hopefully escaping this place altogether. I'm not sure if I'll ever trust anyone again. It's still just so raw and fresh on my mind. It's hard to believe that just a few hours ago I was in a fight for my life. I've had several flashes since then that take me right back in an instant. I can feel his hot breath on my face again, and the searing pain of the knife slicing my flesh. I can still feel the ache in my shoulder from the shotgun's recoil. It's all swirling around in my head, but I refuse to let it break me. Never again. I've found that there's a strange, haunting clarity that comes with surviving something like this. George isn't gone just because he's dead. He lives on in the darkest corners of my mind. You can't kill a ghost. You can only accept it and move on, living with it as best you can. I'll find a way to heal. Maybe, in time, I'll be able to forget the sight of bags filled with body parts and be able to drown out the sound of his laugh. More importantly, maybe I'll be able to forget the smell of cooler number 7.
For now, that's all I've got. The memories and the wounds. I'm stuck with it, cursed to carry it with me, hidden deep amongst the inner workings of my mind. As I sit here on this spring-filled mattress, the motel room feels like a temporary refuge, like a pause button on a game I'm not sure I want to keep playing. But it's where I am now. It's where I have to be. I feel like if I try too hard to rationalize it might make me feel bad for him in some way. And he doesn't deserve that. He deserves exactly what he received. He died in a cold, lonely place where so many of his victims spent their final moments. He will not have beautiful words written about him, remembering his spirit, nor will he be buried on a hill under some ornate headstone. No, he will rot in cooler number 7, a temple built upon his sins. As I lay my head down on the pillow, I can breathe easier knowing that he is gone. But there's a weight that follows it, a final breath of relief, mixed with the cold emptiness of knowing how much it cost me to get here. I see my life in a way that I never have before.
By causing me so much pain, he made me dig deeper, forcing me to prove to myself that I can do things I never thought possible. He taught me not to take life for granted, or else you end up on the chopping block. For that, I am grateful.
Before you go, I want to thank everyone for watching the 9th episode of the Knoll Narrations Postcast. And I want to give a big thank you to Reddit user T-Chill for granting us permission to narrate their posts from r/nosleep for your viewing pleasure. To check out their work, search for Reddit user T-Chill-Out or use the links that are, as always, in the description box below. If you have a scary, spooky, or otherwise unexplained encounter that you would like to share with the viewing audience, please contact us on Reddit at Knoll Narrations or in the comments below. Thanks again for watching. Like and subscribe for more. And remember, take care of yourself out there, or something else might just do it for you.